You mentioned that you only have thimerosal in multivial. Why is that?
I was actually going to get that information for the committee.
Okay, because I would think if they only have it in multivial, if they eliminated having it in all the other vials, there was a reason.
There is definitely a reason, so I was going to clarify that.
Yeah.
There are single-dose vials and multi-dose vials.
And they took it all out of everything but the multi-dose vials.
That's correct.
Okay. How many multi-dose vials are there?
That I can provide you that information.
Okay. I've seen a chart that ranks the longevity of the 30 nations with the best mortality rates in the world, starting with Iceland, Sweden, Singapore, and on down. We didn't even make the top 30. We're the 34th. And ironically, we require more vaccinations than any other country that's healthier, has a less mortality rate than us. Do you see any correlation whatsoever, either one of you, to the 34th worst mortality rate and the most vaccinations to the ones with the least required vaccinations and the lowest mortality rate? They also have children that, past age 20 in those countries, too.
There are many factors obviously involved in longevity for any country. The one thing we do know about vaccinations is that they are among the major public health reasons why generations today live much longer than in previous generations. They are perhaps the most successful public health movement in the world.
Nobody's talking about or against vaccinations.
Well, I was just trying to answer.
We're talking about thimerosal in vaccinations.
I was trying.
And multiple, bomb blast of vaccinations in short period of time on very, thank you, Mr. Chairman. My time's up.
I'm sorry, gentleman's time's expired. Did you want to answer?
No, I think I had an opportunity. Thank you.
Okay, very good. Then the next person, the gentleman from Kentucky, Mr. Yarmouth.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank to the panel for your testimony. Those who know me, and now those who don't, I wear these bracelets every day. These are bracelets that were the brainchild of a young woman in my district who's now 16. She has a younger brother who's autistic. She started at 11 raising money for research in autism by selling these bracelets for $3 a piece. She's now raised over $600,000. Her name's Michaela Riggle. She's already financed a $250,000 study in one aspect of autism. And I raise that not just because I like to brag on her, because she's an incredible person, but also to illustrate the kind of civilian activity that is going on in this field, and it's represented here clearly today. We are here as representatives of the government trying to find out whether there's anything the government should be doing that we're not doing. And obviously there have been a lot of concerns expressed here about frustration and the activities of government. A lot of what we can do is fund things. We do know how to spend money. And we do have this across-the-board cut coming up, the so-called fiscal cliff, if we don't act. We're very much dealing with spending priorities. Last year we, for instance, passed a defense appropriation bill that allocated $2 billion more than the Defense Department actually requested. We still give oil companies $4 billion a year in subsidies that they don't say they need. So my question is, if you had another $2 billion or $4 billion, what could you do with it? And how would you spend it?
One thing I would say before I would spend the dollars is I would not want to displace the private efforts, the efforts that you mentioned, because I think part of the reason why autism research advances is the combination of federal funding, but also having private organizations, advocacy organizations who have research efforts as well. And often these research efforts there are many things I mentioned today already in my testimony that are supported both by federal dollars and by private dollars. And also, of course, the important input of the families, the individuals with autism who themselves inform the research and help shape the research agenda. So no matter what the money, we should keep that partnership. I think in terms of money, clearly, I think as Dr. Bose also talked about, that we can see there are particular scientific opportunities right now in terms of better understanding environmental factors. Many people I know have been concerned that there's been too much focus on genetic factors in autism. I would argue that, in fact, understanding those are very important for understanding the environmental factors, because we know it's a combination of both. So to figure out the combination, it's great that we better, still not fully, but better understand the genetic ones. So now we can focus more on what the environmental factors are, because after all, those are the ones that we can influence and control. So in terms of investments in that, and again, investments in looking very early in life to better figure out what the etiology is, but then also investments in terms of interventions so that we have more effective interventions and more options in terms of interventions. And again, I think more research and more work in trying to figure out how to best have an impact on the lives of those living with autism, both in childhood but very particularly in adulthood as well. So that I think there are a number of areas where we can wisely invest money.
Dr. Boyle?
Well, thank you very, very much for the question.
I wish I could offer you the money.
Yeah. But anyway, we do get requests all the time from states, so we fund states both to do surveillance and to do research. And particularly in the area of surveillance, the state has good knowledge about what's going on within their context, so they can plan for services. They can address some of the many issues that came up today about disparities in diagnosis among racial and ethnic groups. I mean, that would be one of the places where we would really like to be able to fund more states. And similarly, to get answers faster. We have worked very hard over the last 5 years, and it's not really we, it's our academic and state partners who have worked very hard over the last 5 years to develop our research base. And we're just at the cusp of actually being able to explore that. You know, more dollars would actually allow us to do work faster, and to really be able to put as much energy into getting good answers for all of the questions that we heard today.
Okay. Thank you very much for your testimony.
Thank you. Now we'll Mr. Smith from New Jersey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I appreciate the committee's allowing me and others to sit in on this. And I want to thank Dan Burton for his extraordinary work. He is truly a champion. I sit next to him on Foreign Affairs, and he's a great member of Congress and a great leader on combating autism. Dr. Guttmacher, in your testimony, you state that since passage of the Combating Autism Act, there's been a groundswell of activity suggesting, and I think unwittingly suggesting, that this has been about a half-dozen-year effort. As you may know, I introduced legislation as far back as 1997 that became law in 2000 as Title I of the Children's Health Act that established the Centers of Excellence, the Interagency Autism Coordinating Committee, and really began a robust effort that continues to this day. And, of course, the reauthorizations have been very important. My point is, we've been at this in a comprehensive way for more than a dozen years, and there is a sense of impatience that we all have. Frustratingly slow, I think was the word that was just used. But I want to just make a point. Resources often follow demonstrable need. I know that we were able to marshal huge amounts of money to combat the AIDS, the pandemic of AIDS. And Henry Hyde led the effort. George Bush, it was his idea. And we spent billions in combating AIDS, particularly in sub-Saharan Africa, because the demonstrable need was married up with the resources to try to make a difference. I think it hurts the effort, but we have to be accurate. When the 1 in 88 number was first released, horrible number, terrible number, the Associated Press, Mike Stobie writes on March 29th, lead, autism cases are on the rise again, largely due to wider screening and better diagnosis, federal health officials said Thursday. Dr. Guttmacher, you were asked in the New York Times article about that question of epidemic, and you said, yes, it seems to be more common, but the jury is still out. The bottom line is you asked two questions rather than perhaps answer it. And again, you've got to go where the science is, and I deeply respect that. But it is now a couple of years later, and I would appreciate it if the jury is still out, whether or not it's just better surveillance, especially in light of what Autism Speaks has discovered in South Korea. The 1 in 38 study that they funded makes it very clear that when you go further into a study, into the weeds in terms of asking the right questions, more rather than less seems to be the case. And I'm wondering if you could comment on that South Korean study. Secondly, so jury out study, if you could speak to that. Africa. I chair the Africa Global Health, Global Human Rights Committee. I've been working on the Foreign Affairs Committee for 30 of my 32 years in the U.S. House of Representatives. We never saw a prevalent spike like we've seen on autism in Africa as we have seen in the last 15 or so years. I had the first hearing ever on global autism, and what we got back from those who testified was that and the WHO backs us up, there are probably tens of millions of cases of autism in Africa, sub-Saharan Africa in particular, and nobody knows why. I was in Nigeria giving a speech on combating human trafficking, and a man came up and told me, he says, you can't believe how many children in Nigeria are living with autism, and of course in a developing country, it is very, very hard to overcome that. It's hard in this country, even harder there. So if you could speak to those issues,